Hello and welcome to David Caldicott's Audio Immersion, the show where we give you presence and power in your life and business. Hello podcast listeners. So the episode that you're about to listen to is a full-length version of my story, including when I moved to the Middle East as a child and a couple of the significant traumas that happened that shaped who I became and that ultimately led to the epiphany moment that was the creation of the Caldicott Method. So this is really the story of how the Caldicott Method was created, discovered in the first place. And I apologize in advance for the audio issues. It was 4 a.m. and I was out for a walk around my neighborhood, as you guys know that I like to do, and it was pouring with rain. So I had my lapel mic on, but I couldn't keep it from getting a bit of audio distortion. So just forgive that, just settle into it, and there'll be times where you hear the rain. It's quite peaceful actually. So I hope you enjoy. You know, when I was 9 years old, a few days before my 10th birthday, I'd flown out to France with my parents, flown from the United Arab Emirates where we lived. We'd lived there for 5 years as expats, and I gotta say, I loved my life out there. Sand dunes, camel rides, playing ice hockey. You wouldn't think that playing ice hockey in the Middle East is a pastime, but indeed it is. And I wake up one morning, almost immediately after we arrive in France actually. I wake up and my parents say to me and my sister, they ask us to come and sit down with them. I remember the room was very grey, very bland. And they said, "Children, I'm sorry to say, we're not going to be going back to the UAE. We're moving to England. And we couldn't tell you because if you had even accidentally mentioned anything to anybody at school, word would have spread. And our employers would have blocked us from leaving because we were leaving out of contract." Now, later as I got older, I asked them for more details about what had happened there, and it turned out that my parents were working for people who were, let's say, shady, and who had a reputation for using their connections with the immigration office to block people from leaving. Now, my mum had become ill from stress. My father just reached the end of his tether and said, I don't want you living here anymore. This is killing you. So they made their exit plans. And as a 9-year-old child who went to a school where pretty much everybody knew each other, the expat community, at least back then, was fairly small still. We went to church with people who worked at the same place. Kids in my school had parents who worked with mine. And from my parents' perspective, a 9-year-old child simply can't be relied upon with that kind of secret, with a secret with that much gravity, with that much weight. I understand that. It took me a long time to understand that, but I understand that. But here I am, his 10th birthday is in a couple of days, and I now have woken up to a total upheaval of my life. And as the weight and heaviness of that sets in, I turn to my parents and I ask, what about my friends? Keegan, who I played Nintendo with, who I'd lent a couple of my games. Kevin, a young boy from Finland, who I used to play Rainbow Six with in real life. For those who don't know, Rainbow Six is a computer game based on Tom Clancy's books. Covert operations, breaking in and taking out terrorists. Very strategic, it's very methodical, and me and him would run around his villa shooting each other with toy guns and hiding in the rooftops. What about all of my ice hockey friends? Will I ever see them again? And my parents said, no, probably not. And even if you could, it would put us in danger. Like if you have their phone number, you can't call them because no one can find out where we've gone. Because these people are dangerous, and if they find out where we've gone, they'll track us down and they'll make big problems for us, okay? I'm a 9-year-old kid, I don't understand. I don't understand the weight. I didn't understand what it must feel like for a man and wife having built a perfect life in a wonderful country, giving their kids amazing experiences every week, getting a tax-free income and living like royalty, and having all of that to lose. And yet being in an impossible situation where you can't escape, and you're being worked to the core, to the bone, and when you resist, when you try and say no, they try and dig up dirt on you. They try to blackmail you. Now, my parents are pretty upstanding people, so what frustrated the employers was that they couldn't find dirt on them, and that made them turn nastier, more abusive. Many years later, I imagined what it must be like to have been my father in that position, to have that dilemma in front of him. What does one do? What would I do? He did the only thing he could. He got his family out of there, and he managed to get the family cats out of the country without anybody finding out. As far as anybody knew, we were going on holiday to France and coming back. A few days later, it's my 10th birthday, and I'm crossing the English Channel on the Eurostar. And it's 5 years exactly to the day that I left England. We actually flew out to United Arab Emirates on my 5th birthday. Now, the first few weeks were very, very difficult. Very difficult. The culture shock was crippling to me. English people were seemingly so grumpy, and people complained a lot. And the accent was so different. The weather was cold and dark, and everything was small. Everything was so much smaller. Small streets, small buildings, small rooms, small cars. Everything was so small and cold. A part of me was glad that I was home. Part of me was glad that I was back in the country that I'm supposedly from. But having spent my formative years in the Middle East, it didn't feel like home. Naturally, it felt like home for my mum and dad because that was where they were born and raised, and it felt like home for my sister more than me because she was a teenager by this point. But the hardest part of it was how sudden it was. The sudden shock of waking up one day and everything about your life has changed. All of your friends, you don't get to say goodbye to anybody. You don't get to go to your favorite restaurant one last time. And to make matters worse, you feel betrayed by your parents. You feel cheated. I felt cheated. And it broke trust with them for a very long time. It took me many years before I trusted them again, before I treated them well again, because I resented them so much for doing that. I didn't resent them for moving. I didn't resent them for doing what they had to do. I resented them for not trusting me enough to handle the truth. And that taught me that I'm someone that can't be trusted. That taught me that I can't be trusted with the truth. One of the effects of that is that it's made it very difficult for me to keep secrets throughout my life, at least until recent times. It was very difficult for me to keep a secret. I would have a thought and I'd say it straight away, because that's who my parents thought I was, right? So I should live like that. But that was one of the more mild behavioral consequences of what I went through there. The much more painful, the much more disturbing outcome was the insecurity that I felt. The sense that it wasn't safe to actually make friends properly. It wasn't safe to be intimate with people. Because any day now, I'm going to wake up and they're all going to be gone. They're all going to be gone. And I'm not going to be able to say goodbye. I'm never going to see them again. I'm never going to be able to talk to them again. And I can't bear the pain that I'm going to feel when I lose them. And I have no control over it. None whatsoever. Oh, that hurt. Still does. Still does. But as I got older, I discovered that obviously, it's a good idea to be intimate with people. Obviously, it's a good idea to be close with your friends, to love them. Obviously, I am in control of my life, to some extent at least, and it's very, very unlikely that everyone I know is suddenly going to vanish. It would take a global conflict, a meteor strike, or it would take me being whisked off, drafted into the army. But even then, I'll get to see them eventually. I don't know most of the names of the kids that I was friends with. I knew their first names. I've tried looking on Facebook for one or two of them, the ones who I can remember their names. The only ones I found are ones that were in my class, but I didn't really like. The cheaters. Like one kid who, when we were in the Cub Scouts, would compulsively cheat every single badge. We had to swim 50 meters in the sea, and he walked. And the Cub Scout leader was saying to his mum, I can't give him the badge. And she begged and pleaded and charmed him. And he gave him the badge, and that pissed me off, because I swum hard. So he's the only one that I could find on Facebook, the only one that I've ever actually come across again. And so I went through my life. I went through my teen years. I got to university. I went traveling before university, then went to university. After university, I started my first business. When I eventually accepted that business hadn't worked, I worked restaurant jobs for a few years, bouncing around different cities. And all throughout it, I was depressed as hell. And I didn't know why I was depressed. I thought it was because, well, I knew it was because of trauma. I knew that, at least. I'd been interested in psychology. I'd done some studying into NLP, so I knew that there was some traumatic experience in my life. I knew what the experiences were, but I had no control still. I was still powerless. I just would watch myself enacting the same patterns. Making friends with someone, keeping them at arm's length, not returning their phone calls, not actually sharing with them, not being vulnerable with them about who I really am, just presenting an image to them, keeping them away, and keeping them so far away that eventually they stop calling, and I feel abandoned, and I feel like I had no control over it. Self-perpetuating, again and again. I don't deserve to have friends. I don't deserve to form long-term relationships with people because I can't be trusted. And because of that, they're all going to be gone soon. And I tried and tried for so many years. I tried and tried to figure out how to let go of all of that, how to get close to people again. Now I know I'm not the only person who's struggled with intimacy. I know I'm not the only person who has kept people at arm's length for fear of losing them. And each of us has our own unique set of trauma that influences that. And sometimes people are uncomfortable when I use the word trauma to describe things like this, because often we think of trauma as war or rape or child abuse, and that's extreme trauma. But you have to remember that as a child, or even whatever age you're at, any traumatic experience has the potential to wound you at a very deep level. One hot summer night, I can't sleep. It's somewhere around 4 a.m. I'm lying in bed, sweating, and remembering UAE, remembering my life there, remembering the first few weeks of being in England, remembering how painful it all was. And I suddenly realized that my parents didn't hurt me. English people didn't hurt me. Having my friends ripped away from me and my country ripped away from me didn't hurt me. The only thing that hurt me was me. And that's the painful fucking truth. That's the fucking truth that no one wants to face. Because it's always blame them. Blame the attacker. Now, don't get me wrong. If someone is traumatized, if someone is abused, if someone is assaulted, I don't blame the victim. Blaming the victim is blaming them for the action of what happened. Blaming them for the fact that the trauma happened in the first place. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about taking responsibility for yourself. The only person who can blame a victim is the victim themselves. And they're the person who should blame the victim. Everybody else has no fucking right to blame the victim. Their job is not to determine why it happened to that person. Their job is to make sure that it doesn't happen to other people, through laws, through prosecution, through education. But for the victim, blaming the attacker does not serve. Because when you blame the attacker, when I blamed my parents for not trusting me enough to tell me, that put me in opposition to the truth about me. And the truth about me was that I probably wasn't able to keep that secret. Not just because I was 9, but because I had some shit already in my life. I'd already been traumatized a couple of times. Some of those traumas I didn't even know about until many years later. I was sexually molested when I was 4 years old. When I was 6 years old, a classmate murdered a mouse right in front of me, just for fun. It was a pet mouse that our class had, and I loved it. And he just killed it right in front of me, because he was jealous of me being happy, me having parents that are together. So I was already a fucked up kid. And even aside from those 2 events, I'm a child living in a chaotic world. I'm an expat. I live in a country that's not mine. I'm surrounded by extreme wealth and the extreme poverty of the labourer migrants. I have a mismatch of English culture and Christianity with American culture, and fundamentalist Christianity with Islamic culture. And you might not think it, but because of all the talk of diversification being wonderful, in the long term it is. But in the short term, what you get is you get very confused people. Cultural trauma is a real thing. The trauma of not knowing which culture you belong to. And as a result of that, you don't know which moral compass to follow anymore. You don't know what your values are. And that's why it's a painful fucking truth, because it hurts beyond measure to face our imperfections. And a child is innocent, yes, but they're not perfect. The perfect child would not be abused. The perfect child would not get raped. And why? Because the perfect child would defend themselves, would say no, would tell their parents immediately, would not even get into a situation with a predator because they're so perfect that they can look at a person and know exactly what their intentions are. The perfect child is able to read character. The perfect child would not get in that situation. It is our imperfections that lead to the disasters of our life. It was my lack of courage that kept me from saving the life of that mouse. It was my desire to be a good boy and not upset a grown-up that led to me being molested. And it was the consequence of those two events and the cultural trauma of being a child in a world where he is an outsider made me untrustworthy with monumental secrets that would be catastrophic if they were shared. And that truth set me free. That truth set me free. Deep sadness just fell onto me as I just admitted that to myself. And then I forgave myself for it. And that's when everything changed. And at that moment, I felt my body surge with life, with energy. And I felt compelled to stretch, and I arched my back on the bed, and my chest rose up into the air. And as I stretched out, a loud pop came out of my neck. Just a clunk, a bone click, like when you crack your knuckles, but orders of magnitude louder and more satisfying. This huge, and in that moment, flashing before my eyes, every single time in my life where I held back, where I didn't speak up for myself, where I didn't go and ask for help in my business, when I didn't go up and ask that girl to date me, when I didn't tell my parents what had happened to me, when I didn't stop Jason from killing that mouse, every single moment where I had held back my voice suddenly flashed before my eyes at the moment that that pop happened. And then I saw it all like a pile of cards in front of me, and this was a very visual experience. A huge spread of cards with all of those moments on, and I just kind of swept them away. Now, that was the most transformative moment in my life by far. I've had many transformational moments since. Life is a continual transformation. You never run out of transformations. But that one changed everything in more ways than any other did. Every other transformation was just building on that first one. And the reason that first one was so significant was that neck click. Because I realized, after this whole experience, I realized that the neck, that's where your voice comes out of, right? Where the voice box is. So all of those memories, all of those traumatic events, all of those mistakes, all of those failures, all of those excuses that I have to feel shame and guilt about who I am, all of those things that I hang on to and carry as baggage to give me a reason to feel shit, all of that stuff was coming from my voice box. The solution to all of that stuff, the forgiveness for all of that stuff, is the forgiveness of my voice box. Now, it may seem like an obvious thing, or it may seem like a quite abstract thing at this stage, but it opened up a door in my mind. It opened up a road towards a level of awakening that I couldn't have ever predicted. Because it drew a line between traumatic memories. And when I say traumatic memories, I don't just include things where bad stuff happens to you. I include you fucking up. When you got fired from a job, that's a traumatic memory. When you got told off by the teacher at school, that's a traumatic memory. It's maybe a very mild one compared to mouse murder, but it's still tangible. It's non-zero. So all of those traumas that are there, they're connected to your body. They're connected to your body. And it took me a few years of study, and I read esoteric texts, I read NLP, I dived into Eckhart Tolle, I looked at every resource I could find. After spending nearly a decade being in stark opposition to any kind of spirituality or religion, suddenly now I was desperate to find out what other human beings had said about what I was now feeling and experiencing. And the best answers that I got came from the world of shamanism. Particularly in Hawaiian shamanism, at least that's the version of shamanism that is the most well documented, thanks to Sergei King and others. The body is as much you as your mind is you. That was my insight. Now, I'm not the first to have that insight, but what I brought to the insight that was unique was the relationship between specific parts of the body and those specific memories. as I explored this more, I discovered things. I discovered things like my big toe would hold me back from moving forward too quickly in my business. And the reason for it was because when I was a child, I was walking around a hotel swimming pool and I stepped on some glass. A big piece of glass too, it really hurt. And my mum came rushing over and said, "Watch your step." Ever since, my big toe watched its step. This is a subjective experience of you, of who you are, who you actually are. And your fingers are you, just as much as your voice box is you. And if your voice box has all of these traumas pent up in there, then it's going to be restricted. It's not going to let you speak. And if your big toe is pent up with anxiety about traumas that you felt, it's not going to let you move forward. Now here's the amazing thing. That release in the neck, that was my healing. It was made possible by the fact that I forgive myself. The space for the healing was created by the visualization of all of the cards and sweeping them away. I'd done visualizations before and put images onto cards and swept them away and done things like that in my mind, and it hadn't worked. It was very mild. Didn't really change things. But combined with the neck stretch and pop and release, that is what made the healing more powerful, more permanent. And most importantly, that is what gave rise to my life's work, which is teaching other people how to do the process that I went through. Once you learn how to do that process, everything in life becomes easy. And I say everything because I am a man who tends to exaggerate, but the scientist in me wants to make sure I disclaim that by saying some things are still going to be difficult. But in general, the things that are difficult are the new things, the things that you haven't had to deal with before. The point is that they're difficult until you do the process and then they become easy again. It makes everything easy, but only if you actually use it, right? You don't do the process, suddenly everything's easy for the rest of your life. You have to continually practice, practice, practice. But the good news is that it gets easier to do it regularly and it becomes more integrated into your daily life. So what I want to do now is describe to you what the 7 steps are to this process. In brief summary, because it's a complex topic, just to give you something that you can go away with today. Something that you can take home with you and actually put to use. Step 1 is you ground yourself. You sit down on the floor. It's got to be the floor. You sit down on the floor and you take a couple of breaths. Maybe you do a 10-minute breathing exercise, meditation. Whatever you do to ground yourself, you do it as best as you can. If you're new to meditation, if you've never done this sort of thing before, just sit on the ground and take a couple of deep breaths. That'll do. Step 2 is you explore. You explore your body. You explore your inner world. You ask yourself, what thoughts am I having right now? What am I worrying about? What am I struggling with in my life right now? Which part of my body gets tense when I think about that? Which part of my body twitches, gets cold, gets uncomfortable when I think about my money problems? Which part of my body makes me want to move? Which part of my body makes me want to get distracted? And it may be very subtle. It may be an obvious thing like a twitch, and then you go, oh, okay, that twitch is related to that problem. Or it may be something very, very subtle like the desire to pick up a coffee mug. Now, that's both subtle and potentially very complex, because it could be the hand, you know, the hand wants to pick up something. It could be the heat of the liquid on your lips. It could be the stomach. It could be the desire for caffeine. It could be the desire for the milk or the sugar. The exploration is about uncovering yourself, uncovering how you respond to each of these triggers in the world. And a trigger could be a thought, or a trigger could be a desire to have something. When I say trigger, I mostly mean internal triggers, because when you're doing this type of exercise, you're alone at home. You don't do this in a group class. You might do it with other people at a retreat, but it's mostly a solitary experience. Even though you're in the room with other people, you're in your own world. The other people are there for support. You explore that inner space with the intention of finding these problems, finding the twitches, finding the areas that are not chill. And then you move on to step 3, which is you make it hurt. You stretch it. Stretch that part of the body. If you find out that it's caffeine, drink a lot of coffee. Turn up the volume on that part of yourself in a safe setting. You remember you're at home, controlled environment, with a loved one to support you if needed. You turn up the volume on that part of you, and you see what happens. chances are the thoughts are going to get more intense. Chances are your emotions are going to start getting involved. Chances are other parts of your body are going to start kicking in. Those are the protection mechanisms, the things that later on in your life developed as a way to protect that younger part from getting hurt. Step 4 is you regress down. And regressing down, that's my favorite one. Because that's the one where you get to be an animal. You get to be a kid. You get to whine, you get to complain, you get to go, owie, 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 blah. And it's very difficult sometimes to give yourself permission to do that, which is why step 3 is so important, because you're putting yourself under pain. And when you're in that pain, you're going to make an expression of pain. And what you'll find is that when you push that finger, you get that expression, and when you push that finger, you get that expression. There's no logical reason why you would have different expressions for different fingers to express your pain. That's the whole point here. Those expressions, my friends, those expressions are what your face was doing when you got traumatized, when you got hurt that first time, that now that you're pushing that stretch here, you're remembering that pain. It's not a new pain. That is a pain that was there a long time. And the intention in step 4 is to connect you with your inner child, to connect you with your primal self, to connect you with the version of you that was hurt, so that you can do step 5, which is to release. You release the stretch, you release pain that you were holding yourself in, you breathe out, and you just let go. Now, it's very similar to an NLP or psychotherapy. Think about the thing, now let it go. But someone telling you to let it go, like if I say, let go of your problems, just let go of them. It's hard, right? It's very hard. And it's not very satisfying. There's no, like, tangible feeling to it, most of the time. Most of the time, people have to go away for months on a mountain to meditate in silence before they get that kind of profound release. Or maybe they have to take some kind of psychedelic plant medicine. But the release when you use this method is a lot more powerful, because it's the physical releases involved. It's like that neck popping. It's so vivid of a physical experience that you know you've just let go of some shit. You know you've just let go. And it feels so good that you want to do it again. You want to do it again, and you want to go further next time. So step 6 is you repeat. Now, repeating could be repeating the same stretch, or it could be repeating the steps, but on a different part of yourself. And it's up to you to decide which, based on how you feel. Because if you feel like you want to go deeper into that issue, then you can repeat on that issue and go a little deeper. If you feel like you've done about as much as you can on that one, not going to get any further healing on this issue today, then it's better to move on to other parts of the body, because often that part will not be able to heal fully until you've done a bit of extra work on the protection mechanisms around, right? So the repeat is either repeat on that same part or repeat the process on another section. And then step 7 is to rest. So you do steps 1 to 6, you repeat it, repeat it, repeat it. Do that for 30 minutes at a minimum. Maybe you do it up to an hour or even a couple of hours, and then you rest. You just take a rest. You just lie down and you breathe. And while you're breathing, you notice that you're not thinking about your problems anymore. That you're not wrestling with your ego anymore. You're not trying to prove a point. You're not trying to justify your decisions. You're not trying to predict what's going to happen next. You're not trying to change what's already happened. You're just being. And that space, that's what it's all about. Religious organizations for thousands of years have worked to help people to discover that truth for themselves. That the now is what really matters. And you can understand that at a very basic level, or you can understand that at a very profound level that literally includes the entire cosmic universe existing here in this now, with a record of its history and a trajectory for its future. But you, as a conscious being, is able to direct that universe in the direction that you want to see it go. You get to say, I want my life to look like this. And it will happen. But it only happens if you live in the now. So you rest, and you feel that now. You feel it like you've never felt it before. Having spent an hour working on all of your bullshit, all of your baggage, pressuring yourself, feeling that pain, regressing down, connecting with your inner child, forgiving yourself, letting it go. And you're there. And every time you do the process, you stay there a little longer. And every time you do the process, it's easier for you to get back there when you fall out of there. And over time, your life becomes an adventure through the eternal bliss of your present moment, unfolding as you have set it, fully aware of all of your parts. You know the part of you that's afraid of success. You know the part of you that won't let you be richer. You know the part of you that keeps you from expressing yourself when you need to and protecting yourself from predators. You know yourself. And that is my mission, to help the world to know itself. Thank you for listening. Alright, thank you so much for listening. Do make sure to follow, do make sure to subscribe to my channels at David Caldicott. On TikTok is where I'm putting a lot of cool videos these days. And on Facebook at David Caldicott Media. On YouTube, the channel is David Caldicott or the Caldicott Method. Do make sure to follow and give us a like, give us some love, give us some support. And I look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye-bye.